Could you tell us more about this novel? I read somewhere that one of the titles or the subtitle is The State of England, so I guess it's another satire, another biting satire of England today.
Yes, it is. It's like an earlier novel, Yellow Dog. It's satirical, but it's a slightly different kind of configuration of sympathy and terror. But it is about, I mean, what happens to countries when they're in decline? And we're now seeing America beginning to cope with decline. And I don't think they're going to be anything like as reasonable about that decline as England was. England went from being ruler of a quarter of the globe to a second-rate country in the course of the Second World War. And, they talk about the Second World War, they say, the big three, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. Churchill wasn't one of the big three. Stalin and Roosevelt could hardly bring themselves to stop giggling when Churchill said, I think we should do this. And they would be going, because we ceased to matter by then. And somehow we got through it. J.G. Ballard, the writer, who was interned in China by the Japanese in a detainee camp, returned to England at the age of 12, 13. And he said it looked as though England had lost the war. It was blackouts, rationing, everything sordid and dirty and depressed. And what we were doing was coping with this tremendous demotion from being a great power to being a minor power. But we somehow got through, and I think we were very greatly helped by the ideology known as political correctness, relativism, levelism, because that was fiercely anti-imperialist. So as we were coping with this decline, and it takes decades to do it, we had the ideology that was telling us that empires are shit. You don't want an empire. You should be ashamed you ever had one. Nostalgic for the empire? No. And yet, I think there was a great deal of resentment about decline. No nation on earth has ever declined without resisting it and resenting it, just as no human being can cope with it either. But we did get through with some show of restraint. I mean, there's some disastrous things like partition in India and so on. But I don't see America's falling from being the superpower, as it has been for the last 20 years, to it'll take a generation for the decline to make itself really manifest. But I think that the crazy feeling that one senses in America is, to use crude psychological language, denial of this inevitable collapse. But when we talk about England, I had a quote misrepresenting. I didn't say anything remotely like this. I've been quoted widely as saying, I'm glad to leave England because we've just moved to New York, and I wish I wasn't English. Now, no one with an IQ in double figures could possibly say that. I mean, to say, I wish I weren't North Korean would actually be a stupid and unmanly or unwomanly thing to say. You are what you are. And the idea of being ashamed of being English is ridiculous. England, we now lead the world in decline, but we used to lead it in progress. We had our revolution a century before the French did. I think only Holland is more evolved than England. We had parliamentary democracy in the 17th century. And you know, there used to be a fashion for saying that, for instance, Russian literature is so much more dynamic and powerful because it's drenched in blood and struggle. But England has the greatest poetry on earth, with perhaps the only rival is Iran, which has a noble poetic tradition. And to have the most advanced polity and the greatest body of poetry is, I think, an incredible combination. E.M. Foster says the English novel doesn't rule the world. It fears the Russian novel and the French novel, and some might say the Spanish novel. But English poetry fears no one. And it's a tremendous tribute to a nation to have such a great literature and such a civilized political arrangement with you know, no great bloodbaths, no huge injustices on British soil, no slavery on British soil, and England, the country that, above all others, put an end to slavery. And I've lived there for 50 years, and the idea that you would be ashamed of being English while going on living there is moronic.